Hi, and welcome to episode 3 of Talent Acquisition Trends and Strategy podcast. Today, we're joined by Steve Cadigan. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Absolutely. Would you mind sharing us a little bit about your background and what you're working on right now?
Sure, James. So my background has been mostly about 99% of my working life has been in the talent world. I've worked in about 6 different industries. I started as a recruiter in fashion, then became an HR generalist in insurance, got into high tech in the 90s and semiconductor, and then moved from that to Cisco Systems in the hot rising, .com boom of the late 90s, which was really fun. And then the .com bubble burst and it wasn't so fun. We moved from hiring to firing. I had a chance during that run to live and work in Asia. I was the head of HR for Cisco Asia for a couple years. And when that 6-year run at Cisco ended, I moved to Canada, and it was the first chance for me to be a head of human resources for a Fortune 500 company, which was great. It was back in the semiconductor world at PMC Sierra. Had 3 kids during that run in Singapore and Canada. So one a Singaporean and 2 Canadians, made in America, but born in those countries. And moved back to California in, 2008, I think it was, and took a role with Electronic Arts. They were going through a new CEO who wanted to be very acquisitive. And then the second mortgage crisis hit, and my job got really less interesting than it was. And I decided to listen to other opportunities. And then I was offered the first chief HR officer role at LinkedIn, and was there for periods of, massive growth from 400 to about 4,000 people in just under 4 years. We went IPO. It was great. And I left in about 2013. And for the last 9 years, I've been really on my own, doing a lot of thinking around how to help leaders and companies build great talent strategies. So, and a lot of that is around the world of recruiting and, employer brand and building great cultures. And it's been awesome. So that's what I'm, been doing. To sort of the capstone of my time being independent, I published a book last year called Workquake, leveraging the aftershocks of COVID-19 to create a better model of working. And that sort of brings me to sort of what I'm really focused on today, which is I feel over the last decade, it became increasingly apparent to me that both employers and employees were getting more and more frustrated with the model of work that we're having. And what I try to do with my book is reveal why I think it's broken, what I think are some really different approaches we can take to find more meaning for both employers and employees, and different ways of creating value. And that's what I'm helping, organizations think through today. I spend a lot of time speaking and teaching at schools, conferences around the world, which I love doing. And like you, I ventured into the podcast universe when COVID hit. I have a podcast series, and it's been a really fun learning journey, right? With all this new, I've never had a soundboard before, these headphones or microphones, and now this is our world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, thanks again for being here, and I've really enjoyed my conversations with you over the past couple of years, and guiding my own development while I'm taking on different strategic roles with growth stage companies. So this is definitely something I'm very excited about. I've been looking forward
Awesome.
to for a few weeks now. And I think to start us off, it would be great to hear from you. I know you're working with a lot of startups, a lot of growth stage organizations, specifically getting a little deeper into some of the challenges that they're seeing right now when it comes to attracting talent, retaining talent, and ensuring that they have the best fit talent on their team to scale their organizations. What are some of the biggest challenges you're seeing right now?
I'm seeing the growing incapacity for organizations to find what they think they need, and to find full qualified talent. You've been in the industry. I've been in this industry of trying to hire technology workers for the last decade or so. It is just so competitive. And I think that many organizations that I'm talking to today are in domains where they've never had to compete like we've had to in tech for years, right? We've seen every company's experiencing higher turnover than they're used to, than is the norm. Not just people leaving, but people taking a different direction. They're not just going to do the same job somewhere else. They're actually going to move from a sales role to a nonprofit role or something like that. And so that's really, and the pandemic really served to accelerate how people think differently around work and their relationship to it, their lives in general. It's a beautiful thing for an individual to revisit their whole life circumstances. It's scary as hell if you're trying to build a company and everyone that you're employed is like thinking about the world differently, right? And so that's a moment that I think a lot of organizations are challenged with, is that I think they're also challenged with what skills are the skills I should be hiring and growing, because the new technologies and the new platforms being developed continually put pressure on, making sure that you're trying to be as ahead of the curve as you can be, right? And so, I think everyone's trying to do, you and I've had really good conversations around this, like how do we create, solve recruiting, but also address diversity challenges, right? And in our portfolio. And so, I think everyone wants to hire people really, really quickly, and they're learning that's not so easy. So that's probably some of the biggest challenges I'm thinking about. And honestly, James, if I peel it back, when I'm having these conversations, a lot of people saying, "Oh, I've got a big recruiting problem." And this is more so less in the startups, but more in the medium-sized to large-size enterprises. The conversation goes something like this: "Steve, I got a recruiting problem." I said, "How do you know?" "Well, we got all these recs, we can't fill it." I said, "Well, have you got an internal, talent management system?" "No." "Okay, so how do you know that you've got a recruiting problem if you don't know already all the skills of the people in your company? Like, how can you even tell me you got a problem if you don't know what skills you have, or how you can translate or leverage skills from different parts of your company in different areas?" And so, and nobody's at fault here, but we just never have looked at that because we haven't faced the competitive pressure that we have today. And so what I'm trying to help organizations recognize is you may not have a recruiting problem. Yes, you have a recruiting problem compared to how fast you're able to fill positions before. But I think the bigger way of framing this challenge is it's a creativity challenge. So for example, I was talking to one client the other day, and they say, "Hey, we've got all these open recs, and this is really a problem." I said, "Well, why don't you hire contractors to do some of that job while you're looking for full-time?" And by the way, a contractor is the greatest interview process you could possibly have to see if they're good and if they like working there or not. And they're like, "Oh no, Steve, we can't do that. It's going to really wreck our culture. All these mercenaries, running around, short timers, not our culture." To which I said, "Well, how's your culture when 5 people are doing the job of 20 because you can't fill your recs? How's that culture working out for you? Because people are burning out. Like, which trade-off do you want to make?" And so for me, that's why I say it's a creativity problem. Like, you may have people from other parts of the company that could do work that you don't think they can because you're just not aware. And secondly, why don't you reconsider that work can be done in different ways other than having a full-time employee do it, right?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, are you seeing in terms of one of the reasons why companies are hesitant to bringing on contractors is maybe they don't have the right processes and outcomes outlined for each specific function, where maybe it's they just don't have the right infrastructure built out to where people can come in on a contracting basis and be successful? Or what do you think is the primary reason why leaders and hiring managers don't feel like contractors can be a better solution to their problem?
Yeah, there's probably a few things. I think you highlight a really interesting one, which I think is a muscle that most organizations will really benefit from in bringing in contractors, which is, if you're bringing in a contractor, you need to be able to explain what the work that needs to be done quickly to somebody, right? Like, you don't want to hire a contractor that's going to take 6 months to teach how to do the job, right? So what that's doing is it's putting pressure on organizations to maybe revisit jobs and maybe re-engineer how jobs are structured. And in a more fluid world of work where people are leaving organizations faster than ever, we're seeing this all over. Every geography and every industry is experiencing higher turnover. You need to be able to onboard people faster. So contractors are a great place to try that, because it's a really good, a safe environment where someone from the outside comes in and say, how fast can we get this person making an impact? And so that's, probably the one of the most interesting and opportunistic areas of, leveraging the contractors. But to answer your question more specifically, so why aren't more people doing this? It's just a mental model that we have where I feel as an organization, I'm just speaking as if I'm just a, corporate America. I only feel that I can create value if I own an employee and they work for me dedicated full time. That I'm uncomfortable. Someone may have other clients, someone may have other priorities, and I won't be number one to them. And I think if we've learned anything in the pandemic, the workforce has spoken and said, my freedom, autonomy, and independence is more important than anything. I would rather have that, and I will quit before I go back to the office where I'm more distracted and more bothered. And, I don't see the reason that I can be more productive there when I just showed you for 2 years I could be more productive at home. And just, I'm not talking about every job, because a lot of jobs were frontline and couldn't do that. But for the places, for many knowledge workers who can and did work from home, like, why are we asking them to go back? Which is another big, question mark and challenge for organizations to deal with. I mean, I don't know about you, but all the other recruiters I talk to, when you say, hey, what's the one thing candidates are saying today that they didn't say 3 years ago? First question, can I do this job remotely? Like, maybe they don't necessarily want to do it all the time, but that's sort of a litmus test of how evolved is the company with their talent strategy thinking. Are they comfortable with that?
And I think a lot of companies are making the mistake of thinking, well, this is a candidate market. It's going to shift back. It always does. And so we don't actually really need to commit to these changes, or even if we do, it's just going to be on a temporary basis. And next year we're going to go back in office. But I think they're missing the point. The point is, you want the best fit individuals to be on your team, and you have to create compelling employment opportunities for them, whether it be contract or full time. Because at the end of the day, your team is going to thrive and succeed when you have the best fit people engaged and that want to work with you. So I think that businesses are, to an extent, almost over optimized toward revenue functions and investing in customer journeys, but they're not necessarily slowing down and investing on employee journey or contractor journey, and thinking about what types of experiences and outcomes are we investing and optimizing in to create for employees that are working with our team. So it's
well said, James. Well said. Absolutely. And I think that's I like to highlight and underline what you just said. I mean, I think this is the biggest question I ask when I get an audience of non-HR people and CXOs is, okay, how do you guys create value? And they say, well, with our people. I said, okay, that's the most important dimension and element in your organization to create value. Yep, people. Okay, so did you spend more money on your people systems than you did on your accounting or your CRM? Nope. Okay, is it the first thing you talk about in every business meeting? Is people related to how can we build a great team? How can we thrive? How can we unlock magic in our employees? Nope. It's the last thing on the agenda. Most companies I work for. So why is that? Why is that? This is the most important lever for you to be successful. It's the least invested system. It's the lowest priority on your business, operating tasks. Why is that? And so, when I go in and they say we have a recruitment problem, I go, okay, well, where is that on your list of priorities, right? Like, or if I'm negotiating with somebody, I was negotiating the other day, say, hey, can you come and talk to us about the future work? It's the number one concern of all our leaders and our board of directors. And I said, yeah, I'm happy to. Like, what's your budget? And like, no, can you just come in and talk about it? I'm like, for free? The most important thing in your company? What? So I think we've always had the ability to talk about people are number one, but we have, unfortunately, most of us have worked in few companies where we really saw what that looks like when people are really operationally number one. And I had one company, my last one that I worked for, LinkedIn, that really broke the mold on that. It was the first thing we talked about in every meeting, every company all hands meeting. Build a world-class team. It wasn't the sales revenue. It wasn't the new products that we're introducing. It wasn't our acquisition strategy. It was build a world-class team first. And if we had a problem that wasn't tracking well, we never got to the other stuff, because the other stuff didn't matter if we didn't have good leaders, good development strategies in place, right? And unfortunately, most of us don't get to see what that can look like. And as you say, we talk about the targets, we talk about the quarterly numbers and so forth, and we just ride the bike.
Yeah, yeah, it's we're seeing a lot for growth stage organizations. We're seeing a lot more benefits and perks that are catering toward employers really starting to own, at least the ones that are winning right now, are owning the fact that employees and contractors are going to hold them accountable to helping them get the most out of life, not just professionally but personally. And we're seeing more emphasis on PTO. We're seeing minimum PTO policies become more common. You know, it's what good is an unlimited policy or a 4-week PTO policy if nobody feels empowered to take it. So
Mhm.
we're starting to see more minimum PTO policies. We're starting to see companies understand that part of the content that they need to produce on social as well as on careers pages needs to be centered around capacity planning for certain functions. I mean, you know, even if you have a minimum policy but you don't have the right capacity planning on a function level to ensure that people can actually take time off, it can be difficult too. So we're starting to see a bigger emphasis there. We're starting to see more companies, some of the top companies offer more holidays off, recharge days, mental health days. We're starting to see these types of benefits come in as well. Because again, the expectation from employees is no longer, hey, you know, it's not just how much money am I going to make? What's my title? Where am I going to be in 3 years? It's also what's this experience going to be like, and how does it interact, and how can it integrate with my personal life and my personal goals. And again, we're seeing more of this, but it's still not a lot. I mean, we're seeing, I would say, the top 90th percentile companies doing it, but a lot of companies are still missing the mark here, and they're stuck in that old way of thinking of like, oh, this is a candidate marketing market. It's going to come back around. We're not going to need this, but they just don't understand that it doesn't matter. Even if you're in an employer-driven market, A players, the best fit individuals are always going to have the most options.
Right. Yeah. Let me
Right.
rephrase what you just said, James, and I hope our audience really listens. So you captured that really, really well. We're seeing the personalization of work. We've always, we'd seen before the pandemic, cafeteria benefit plans. No one's ever rarely has someone raise their hand and say, wait a second, my colleague has 5 kids and you're going to cover all their kids for free on their medical plan. I have no kids and I'm not getting an offset there. Like it doesn't feel equitable. I'm happy for my colleague in their medical care, but my circumstances are different. And I would appreciate maybe a little more contribution to my 401k, so that when and if I do have children, I can have the ability to, pay for their college or whatever it is, And so that personalization now it has moved from benefits. And now it's so interesting to me because the benefit, what's in that package now is moved to, I want more freedom and more time, to discretionary time to do what I want, when and where I want. I want you to trust me more. Like that. I agree with you on the unlimited PTO. Like that's as unlimited as the trust you have with your boss, right? Like,
Right.
why do we do that? And a lot of people are really uncomfortable asking for it, right? And so you look around and say, how much do you think I could get away with? Or, what's really the okay number, right? And that's hard. I've broken more policies as an HR person than I've made. I feel very, very proud. And I think that's a signature of my career path. If you look behind me, because I feel like we've over tried to prescribe every circumstance to avoid some outcome, rather than just say, let's just address the issues when they come and try to be as fair and transparent as we can. It doesn't mean making the employees happy all the time. It just means trying to have some sort of fair, transparent decision-making practice here. But that's not going to stop. We're going to continue to see, I think, the personalization of people's what days you work, when you work, where you work from, what your hybrid schedule is. Maybe we're seeing some companies now, oh gosh, who is it? I forget who it is, says we can have your base be X and your bonus be a target of this, or we can take the bonus and put it right into your base. What do you want? You're going to have more potential upside if you have the bonus separate, but you also have the potential for downside, right? It's like companies say, do you want options or RSUs? If you get options, you get more, but there's no downside risk. You get RSUs, you get less, but there is zero downside risk, And so, that I think we're going to see a continuation of that. Now it's a benefits manager's nightmare come true. Like, whoa,
Sure.
but everyone's needs are different. And what the pandemic did for people said, it made clear, like, no, these are new things that are important to me, and that's a really great thing. It's putting enormous pressure on organizations. But Canva, look what Canva has done. Canva sort of threw it down and said, okay, we're letting our teams decide where and when they work. We're not going to one size fits all this, right? Which what you're speaking to is the one size fits all. It's over. Like, if that's what you're trying to build towards, it just doesn't work. I remember one time I was throwing out this notion of a more flexible benefit package to an audience of HR people in Seattle, and one woman raised her hand and said, hey, that's really unfair. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. Do you pay everyone the same in your company? She says, no. I said, well, that's really unfair. I go, you're already making variability in how you reward people. So this is just a little more of a natural extension of that.
So quick follow-up question on that. So flexible benefits packages at scale for mid-market enterprise companies. How do you really make that scalable and deliver on that? Because I can only imagine from an operational perspective that is going to require a lot more heavy lifting. Is it as simple as just saying you need more investment in HR, you need more a larger team to manage that, or do you recommend specific technologies or processes that help companies implement this strategy?
So what I would do is, it's a great question. I would elevate the conversation to include everything. Say, okay, do we believe the personalization of work is happening, and that we would benefit being able to attract greater people and maybe getting them to stay longer if we did that? Yes. Okay. So if we don't do that, people may leave sooner, and we may not get the high quality people we could if we don't offer more flexibility. Yes. Okay. What's the cost of people leaving sooner? What's the cost of, more recruiting budgets, more empty jobs, jobs left open because we can't fill them, and so forth. And so I would say, in terms of looking at it as a benefit cost, that is not the full way that you should be measuring. Is this a worthy investment for you to do more? And then what I would say is, and there's lots of different organizations that can consult on doing stuff like this. I mean, Netflix has already been doing this for over a couple of decades now, where they say, we're valuing your job, James. All in, your job is worth about $320,000. You decide if you want to take some of that money and buy some Netflix shares. You decide if you want to take some of that money and top up on your benefit plan. You decide, because we don't know what's important to you. You do. Or you can take this, wheelbarrow full of cash. What do you want? Right. And so, so what I would say is, come up with a number that's based on data, based on some of the research of your benefit consultants, and say, what is a reasonable number that we think someone can draw from? And then what are the choices that they make? And then just build a website where people just sort of decide and then figure out how it works. The danger or potential, unintended consequence of this is what happened at Netflix. And that is two people doing the same job having vastly different outcomes with their choices. Okay. So for example, you decide you want to double down on on Netflix shares. And so you allocate a lot of your money. We have the same number, whether it's 330, 320, whatever it was I used. You say, I want 50K to buy Netflix shares. And I say, the stock's definitely going to come down. I'm going to hold off on that. I've got 6 kids. I'm going to go and buy a bunch more benefit stuff. Well, then Netflix stock go through the roof. And now your package is way more than mine, but I made that choice, And so as a company, now I'm worried about Steve, because Steve didn't make the choice that James is, and James is showing up in his Lamborghini and is doing, bought the vacation home in Tahoe. And now that's a problem potentially, Right. And so, that's the dark side of choice, is different outcomes for people. Right. Which is super interesting.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly insightful. I'm glad we were able to dive into that a little bit deeper, but I still feel like people would prefer to be able to make those choices overall. There's going to be cases, potentially something like that occurs, but I think by and large, the positive outweighs the potential downside.
Sure. Right. And here's how I look at this, James. And this applies to recruiting. It applies to talent strategies, applies to benefits. We are in an era of experimentation. We've got to try new stuff, because we know the domain that we used to know, which is hire people who are more qualified than they are. People stay longer than they are today. We know those things are changing. So we're going to have to revisit. And I find the fear and the resistance to that is higher than I think it should be right now, where we should, just try to do it. And here's the thing. If you're hiring knowledge workers, particularly software developers, this works for software developers because software developers create through A/B testing. They're used to experimenting, right? And so they will value you if you say, hey, we're going to try this bonus plan. It may not have the outcome that we think it does. And if it doesn't have a favorable outcome, well, then we reserve the right to get smarter and we'll adjust it. And I think that's about trust and transparency and, knowing, letting your people know, like, hey, we're not perfect, but we're going to try to be, and we're going to, admit when we're wrong,
Sure. Yeah. And I think this would also be a good time. I know we have about probably 5-10 minutes left. So
Sure.
I really wanted to touch on a subject that really resonates with me, something that I heard you talk about a couple of years back when you're talking about retention, talking about average tenure of employees. And you had what I think a lot of people in HR or talent acquisition would consider kind of like a borderline radical perspective on average tenure and how companies should talk about tenure and think about tenure when they're hiring and looking at people's background and weighing previous tenures into the equation if they want to move forward with a hire. I was hoping you could just share with us your general philosophy on tenure, and we could riff on that for a few minutes.
Yeah, this is a hard topic for people today because tenure is declining radically. I mean, the median tenure for people between 25 and 35 in the United States is 2.8 years. And that means half that number is less, okay? Half the demographic of people that age. And so I'm not thrilled about that trend, but everyone I talk to doesn't think it's going to change. So what that really means is, let's look at organizations who don't have high tenure and what they're experiencing, and can we learn some things? And if we look at, let's just take some really big brands in technology: Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, Airbnb, Oracle. Those companies, none of them have a median tenure over 2 years. Okay, none of them. And look at the valuation, look at the profits, look at the creativity. And so, listen, I am the first person that says I want to keep my best people as long as I can. But insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different outcome. And we all know people are not going to stay as long. So there is big value in new people and new ideas and new energy coming in new ways of solving problems. And I think what I'm trying to help people understand right now is I think maybe we've overvalued tenure. And if you have benefits that reward people just for time there, not outcomes of being there, I think that's a missed opportunity. And, in Silicon Valley, we don't have 10-year celebrations. We have 10 months. You're still here. Oh my God, can I get you a Starbucks? It's like that. It's that crazy. But let me share a last observation here, and then I'll turn it back over to you. What is, let me just ask you what I hope is a hypothetical question. When you think of the world and the one geography in the world that has the greatest innovation, the most number of unicorns, the most number of intellectual property produced, the most number of highly successful, highly valued companies, what part of the world is that?
Silicon Valley.
Okay.
Right.
Is it a coincidence or not that it's also the area that has the highest turnover of any part of the world? So that's sort of like my drop mic moment. The most fluid part of the world is also the part of the world that's producing the most disproportionately successful outcomes to a 10x magnitude, right? So what's going on there? People are moving, networks are growing. This is the thing that I say, like, someone moves, they grow their network. That's good for them. Maybe not so good for you if they left, but it's really good for the ecosystem. And so there's power with people changing and iterating ideas and building relationships and building trust in that domain, in the community, not just in your organization. So I'm trying to help people like get a little more comfortable. It's not all bad that people are leaving, but wouldn't you all want to work for someone that cares about you for your whole career, not just when they work for you? That's another part, right? It's like, yeah, it's someone who cares about me for my whole career. Okay, well then stop the, what I call the Tony Soprano school of HR, which is I only care about you when you work here. When you quit, you're dead to me. Like that's so short-sighted because you've got more alumni than ever. And you should curate it and nurture it, right? So yeah, it's a little bit radical. It's a little bit crazy. I've had people say to me after I tell them that, like, who invited you here? Like, we thought that was taboo, that we could never talk about that, but we have to talk about it because it's a moment. We have a moment now after the pandemic to create better talent strategies. Let's use that opportunity, right? Let's build something better.
So yeah, I actually completely agree with you. So it's I think it's something that, whether companies want to admit it or not, is definitely the direction that we're heading. So particularly in tech. So I think just one final question before we jump off is just at a more tactical level. How can companies be successful and thrive in an environment where employees are likely going to be giving notice and sooner than maybe anticipated? What can companies do to be successful in that model and to scale and to have the growth that they're looking for?
Have more discussions with your employees about what their plan is. At LinkedIn, they're your first interview. We're saying, okay, when you leave the company, what do you want to be doing? Have more honest conversations, so so that if someone's thinking like, hey, I've got 2 years or 1 year, that if it's okay with you, then I say, all right, fine, let's agree to that. And then always have a pipeline. Like if you're recruiting, start recruiting when someone leaves, it's too late. Just like I tell my friends, hey, if you're looking for a job after you got fired, it's too late. Like you got to always be looking for talent. And so, that's number two. People want to grow. People want to learn. And I think that's the biggest driver why people are leaving, because they think somewhere they could learn more or grow more. Make sure you're filling that hunger and that thirst through rotations, new opportunities, and assignments, because that's what people really want. And if you've got a medium to large size enterprise, you've got different offices, locations, countries, departments to feed that. So build your own and expect people are going to go. Build a talent strategy that expects it. And so and then keep in touch with your alumni too. Like they may come back to you, right? Or they may be sources of goodwill referring candidates to you, right? So that's why I said, like, we've got to think about creating value beyond just when someone's working for me, beyond just an employee. Look at it more broadly, because that whole ecosystem is going to benefit you and be wind at your back if you do it right.
I couldn't agree more. And this has been so much fun. We're coming up on time here. Just for our listeners, how can they find you? Where should they follow you online?
Great. So I've got a website, stevecadigan.com. Please go there if you're interested in signing up for, me to push to you more information or what's on my mind. Go there, connect with me on LinkedIn, or follow me on LinkedIn if you want to. I also have a TikTok channel, which is filled with a series I call True Stories from Corporate America. We're starting a new program where we're going to be asking people to share their stories, which I can share on their behalf on TikTok. So super fun. And also I just, let me show you my book here. It's Workquake. You can buy the book anywhere books are sold. And we've sold a ton on Audible. People are listening to it more than they're buying it. I guess that's what people do now. I'm the only guy in the neighborhood that gets a newspaper delivered still. So one of my friends like, how do you know there's old people in the neighborhood? They get a newspaper delivered. Okay, guilty as charged. But James, thanks for having me on the show, man. It's really good to see you, and we need to catch up off air too some more.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again for being here, and for everybody tuning in. We'll see you next time.